Today's video is going to be talking about the first time I saw myself in a book. The first time I saw myself in a book, I have always been a reader, but for a long time, books never truly reflected my experiences. I read stories about adventures, heroes, and everyday people, but none of them seem to live in my body like mine. None of them navigated the world with the same struggles. I did for years. I expected this as a normal. I assumed books were meant to be an escape, not a reflection of reality. But everything changed when I read Out of My Mind by Sharon M. Draper. The first book that made me feel seen. The main character, Melody, has cerebral palsy. While her experience wasn't exactly like mine, just seeing a condition like mine represented in a book was an overwhelming and validating experience. Until then, I had never read about a character who shared any aspect of my disability. And it made me realize how much I had been missing out. Melody's struggles, her intelligence, and the way she was underestimated by people around her resonated with me, even though our lives were very different. I finally saw a piece of myself in a story before reading Out of My Mind. I had internalized the idea that stories about people like me were not worth telling, whether it was disability or being part of the LGBTQ community or any other part of my identity. Mainstream books rarely acknowledged experiences like mine, and when they did, they were often felt inaccurate or one-dimensional. Seeing Melody's story made me realize how important representation truly is. It was a reminder that my story mattered. Reading that book didn't just validate my identity, it changed the way I read. After finishing Out of My Mind, I started actively seeking out books that featured disabled characters. I wanted to see how different disabilities were represented, both those I had and those I didn't. I became aware of the gaps in publishing and the way disability representation was often lacking or filled with harmful stereotypes. It was frustrating, but it also gave me a sense of purpose. I now wanted to read just stories where people like me were erased or misrepresented. I wanted books that reflected the reality of disabled lives in all their complexity. Finding representation in books always changed the way I viewed myself. I had spent years feeling invisible, but suddenly I had proof that people like me belonged in stories. That shift in perspective was powerful. It made me more confident in my identity and more willing to embrace the parts of myself that I once thought were too different to matter. I wasn't alone. There were others like me in or experiences were worthy. Sharing this experience also reinforced the importance of Own Voices books. Stories written by people who shared the identities they're portraying. When representation is done well, it can be transformative, but when it's done poorly, it can reinforce harmful stereotypes and shape marginalized readers feel even more invisible. That's why I believe that strongly in supporting books that tell authentic stories, especially for readers who are still waiting to see themselves reflected. I often think about what it would have meant to find the book earlier in life. If I had seen myself in stories as a child, maybe I wouldn't have spent so much time feeling like any outsider. Maybe I wouldn't have questioned whether my experiences were validated. That's why representation isn't just important, it's necessary. Every reader deserves to feel seen, to know that their story is worthy telling. Seeing myself in a book for a first time was a defining moment in my reading journey. It opened my eyes to the power of storytelling and the impact of representation. Now, every time I pick up a book, I look for those moments of recognition, just for myself and for other readers who are still seeking for their own reflection in the pages of books.
Done. Pause.